Good evening, everybody. It's 7 o'clock, so we're not getting paid overtime, so I think we should start. We have a number of people here in the room, but we also have some guests online. Matthew Smith, Senior Responsible Officer for Urgent and Emergency Care in the CCG. Welcome, Matthew. Tracy Cooper, Service Director, Ambulatory Care. Try saying that when you're drunk. Cambridgeshire Community Services NHS Trust. Welcome, Tracy. Bruce Lutter, Assistant Director of Business Development and Strategy. And Russell Waite, who is an independent scrutineer. So welcome, Russell. Also like to welcome Saqib Rahman from Health Watch. I think if we could start with the people in the room, or the members of the committee, just introducing themselves so that the people online, as well as the people in the room, actually know who everybody is. I'm Councillor Elsie and I'm the chair.
Yeah, good evening, I'm Councillor Fenner.
Good evening, Councillor Farouk.
Good evening, Councillor Chris Burbidge.
Good evening, Councillor Scott Warren.
Good evening, Councillor Brian Tyler.
Good evening, I'm June Bull and I am a co-optee representing the Peterborough Parish Councils.
Councillor Simon Barkham.
Councillor Sam Hemraj. Councillor Shabina Kayoum.
Councillor Ansar Ali.
Thank you all, and obviously we have Joyty, who's the Director of Public Health, and Charlotte. Welcome both. So we go to agenda item 1. Paulina, apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. We have apologies for absence from Councillor Rush, and Councillor Fenner is substituting, and also apologies have been sent from Neil Boyce, who is Parish Councillor Co-optee member.
Thank you. Agenda item 2, declarations of interest and any whipping declarations. None? Jolly good. Agenda item 3, minutes of the Health and Scrutiny Committee held on the 9th of November 2021. You should have all had ample opportunity to have a look through those. Does anybody have any issues with the minutes as recorded, or are you all happy for me to sign them off as an accurate record? Agreed? Those are agreed, Paul. Do we need a proposal in a second? Okay. Agenda item 4, call-in of any cabinet or cabinet member key officer decision.
Thank you, Chair. We have no call-ins for this evening's meeting.
Thank you, Paulina. So we move on to agenda item number 5. I'd like you to refer you to the document which was sent out about an hour and a half ago. Clearly, due to travel and time commitments, there's a number of people in the room who haven't had an opportunity to review that document properly. So if I could ask that on this item, if you could run through the report for us, and we'll take questions at the end.
Thank you, Chair. Would you like me to start?
Yes, please.
So thanks for the opportunity to talk to you tonight. I will go through the consultation document, which you should have received in a little bit of detail for the reasons that you've outlined. So the document is talking about a specific service which is known as the Oliver Zangwill Centre, and the service that it provides is psychological neuropsychological assessment and rehab for adults with an acquired brain injury. And it's one of a range of neuro rehabilitation services that we commission and provide for people in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. The background to the proposal is that in 2019 we undertook a review of our neuro rehab services across Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. We came up with a number of actions, areas for improvement and further work, and one of the areas of further work was around the Oliver Zangwill Centre. And the reason for that is that we identified that it was probably unique nationally in terms of the type of service it offers, but also there was a fairly substantial cost attached to its delivery. That review took place in 2019, and subsequent to that, we did some work with Cambridgeshire Community Services, who actually provide the service, on how that service could be structured and funded going forward. Clearly, we have had the pandemic in the past couple of years, but the work has continued in the background. And what's happened is that there's been a dwindling number of referrals into the service, despite the best efforts of Cambridge Community Services to identify ways in which to deliver the service and attract patients from various different sources. In addition to that, what the consultation document talks about is the financial context that we find ourselves in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. So we are in what's described as level 4, which is the most severe level of financial challenge in the English NHS. And therefore we have to work very hard to make sure that every NHS pound we spend is well spent. But in that context, the £800,000 that's currently going into the Oliver Zangwill Centre service has become very difficult to justify given the dwindling referrals, and also, as set out in Section 6 of the consultation document, we do commission a range of other neuro rehab services for our patients. So, for example, Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Foundation Trust provide a community neuro rehab team, which includes a range of services set out in the table at the bottom of the page in section 6. And in addition to that, there are more specialist services which we buy from Addenbrooke's and from North West Anglia Foundation Trust. There are also voluntary services which help these types of patients. And we do sometimes buy very specific services from the independent sector. For example, courses of inpatient rehab. So, in summary, based on the review, all the work, the dwindling referrals, the financial context, and the range of alternative services, we feel that we can meet the reasonable needs of our population, but the proposal in here is to cease the Oliver Zangwill service subject to the outcome of consultation. I'll stop there, and obviously I'm very happy to answer any questions, and we have Tracy and Bruce from Cambridge Community Services who can provide more detail.
Thank you. Do I have any questions? Councillor Barkham.
Thank you, Chair. Hi. Briefly on the referrals, you said dwindling referrals. What numbers was previous and what is it reducing to? It's a bit vague just to say reducing the numbers of referrals. Thank you.
Thank you. So if I can turn to the table 1 on page 3, the column which is headed assessed, those are the new referrals coming through into the service. So in 2017-18, there were 25 patients, and 21-22, 6.
Forgive me, page 3. Do we have a different layout of report?
Sorry.
If you look at your document, Simon, it's page 9 in the middle of the bottom of the page, but if you look in the bottom left-hand corner, it's page 3.
It's table 1, assessments and referrals into the Oliver's Angle Centre.
Okay. I don't have that on screen right now, so can you just tell me those numbers, please?
Yeah, certainly. So 2017-18, there were 25. And then in the subsequent 2 years, there were 14. And then in 2021, there were 11. And in 21-22, 6.
Okay, thank you. And then just one briefly. Why, then, are the referrals being reduced? Are people not wanting to refer to this centre because of any negative aspects?
So I'll probably ask Tracy and Bruce to comment on this because they're a little bit closer to the service. But what I would say is that we do have a range of alternative services. So, for example, the Cambridge and Peterborough Foundation Trust Neuro Rehab team takes a large number of referrals. I think in the paper it refers to over 2,000 in the most recent 6-month period. So that's probably part of the context, but I will just turn to Tracy and Bruce for perhaps a bit further detail on that.
Thank you, Matthew. I mean, I can't tell you, of course, why people, if they have suitable cases, might choose not to refer them. But what I can say is that the service has a very strong reputation, both in England and internationally. So I don't think there's a reputational issue. But what we also know is that in the last few years, a number of other private organisations have stood up providing very similar services. And we've found that the insurance market that in the past made referrals to us is referring to these sometimes in-house private providers.
Thank you.
Riley.
Thank you, Chair. I'm always concerned when we are looking to reduce services, as you said just now, that it's got high reputation. We are living through challenging times, and I'm always very concerned when NHS services are being outsourced, privatised. You know, we should be competitive enough so that insurance company can refer to service that we provide if we've got a high reputation. So I'm a bit concerned that the insurance companies, rather than choosing to refer to NHS, are referring to the private sector. I think NHS is the best placed service to provide for our communities.
Can I respond very briefly to that, Chair?
Yes, certainly.
I think what I would point out that the NHS, the Clinical Commissioning Group, which is responsible for buying the services for our population, has to look at the whole range of services available to these patients. And I think the choices that insurance companies make are probably outside of my remit, of the CCG's remit.
If I can, I think that's true to an extent, but I don't think that's the whole picture. most insurance companies place through case managers, and those case managers will look at the marketplace and will assess a number of people and number of services for the clients that they're representing. Invariably, they'll come around and do inspections and have interaction with the facilities prior to making a recommendation to the insurance company. They won't have a bias towards any particular provider, nor will they have a bias against the NHS as opposed to private, or the other way around. So whilst I accept to some degree, I don't think that's the whole picture.
If I may comment, Chair, through you. Thank you very much for that intervention. I appreciate that. And I think that our NHS should be competitive with the private sector.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Bull, then Councillor Farouk, and then Councillor Kayan.
Thank you, Chair. Surprisingly, the impact of the pandemic on referrals hasn't been addressed in the report, and looking at the referrals over the last 2 years, or even over this financial year. So my question is simply, how certain can you be of your findings to cease provision at OZC, whether it's the right one for our neuropsycho rehabilitation patients? Thank you.
So thank you for the question, and I completely understand the point that you're making. However, I would go back to the starting point, which was that our review of all of these services began in 2019, before the pandemic, when we identified that this was a relatively high cost and unique service which other CCGs don't commission. And in the overall financial context we are in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, it's very difficult to justify continuing. And I think, to address your direct point, you're right. The pandemic may well have had an impact, but it doesn't alter the original rationale that I've described.
Councillor Farouk.
Thank you, Chair. I have a couple of questions, if I may. I'll answer them, or I'll ask them one after the other, just for ease of answering. So the first one I have, so you've identified 6 patients who are assessed as appropriate for the rehabilitation programme, who are choosing to postpone their care for a number of reasons. Do you have any of these reasons outlined, or sort of any underlying reasons that feature a pattern?
So again, I'll turn to Tracy or Bruce to respond to that. Obviously, we have to be careful, given the very small numbers, that we don't disclose any personal information. I'm sure you'll understand that, but we'll try our best to give you an idea of the themes.
There are actually 3 themes amongst just 6 people, and the themes are having COVID, fear of catching COVID during treatment, or simply personal circumstances that means they wish to put off starting any kind of treatment for the time being.
Thank you. And my second question is, of these 6 patients identified and another 15 that you've mentioned receiving bespoke care, I know you've touched on it in the report that there are other alternatives available for them. I just wanted to clarify if there's a guarantee that their service needs or their care needs would be met by these alternative services.
So I think the answer to that is that we believe, having looked and reviewed all of the services, that we can meet the reasonable needs of our population. But what I I'm not going to say is that it will be an exact equivalent of the Oliver Zangwill service approach. So Cambridge and Peterborough Foundation Trust Community Neuro Rehab team do provide all the different types of therapeutic input, and obviously we would look at each individual's assessed requirements and meet those through our other existing services. But the exact method of delivery of that therapy would be slightly different to what the Oliver Zangwill service does. Again, Tracy or Bruce, please clarify further if you feel you need to.
No. Okay, Councillor Cohen.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'm very concerned from a primary care perspective about the complex needs of such patients. I find it very difficult as a GP in Peterborough referring patients who have undergone a traumatic brain injury and referring them onwards for simple things such as physio. I do not think that CPFT will be a suitable alternative to the Oliver Zangwill Centre in terms of psychological needs, simply because of the fact that you have a variety of complex cognitive and speech impediment. And often with a patient who requires psychological input from the general population, they have to wait for months and months before they can access any input from CPFT. How can we guarantee that the alternatives will provide psychological input in a timely manner before these patients suffer from any adverse outcomes as a result of their psychological needs not being met? Thank you.
Yeah, again, really good question, and one we're very mindful of. So clearly, CPFT do deliver a specialist service for these types of patients, including psychological input. But I think there is a wider context here about what the local NHS can provide for all of its patients, particularly in the context of the pandemic and also going forward our financial position.
Thank you. I do think that the burden will be borne by primary care, who are already struggling and have problems with accessibility. So I would like this to be taken on board as a concern, please, for these patients. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Bull, did you have a second question? Did I see?
No, Chair, it was picked up by a colleague. So you clearly the pandemic comes into it, and it sounds to me that we're cutting corners for cost-saving effects when we've got patients which have a multitude of multifaceted, multi-complex issues which will not be clearly addressed through the NHS because you don't have this dedicated centre anymore. So to me it's coming across as a very quick win fiscal saving. That's all I will say.
Thank you. I've got a question, and I've got Councillor Burbage and Councillor Hemorrhage. Can I ask, in 4.1, you've got some figures there. As a block-funded contract, the service continues to cost the NHS 800,000 per annum, despite lower numbers, yada yada yada. This year, the service costs an average of around £50,000 per patient per annum. That's that's less than £1,000 a week, and I kind of don't understand, if it's only £1,000 a week, why you're struggling to get referrals, because the three figures that follow it, i.e. the assessment of £2,000 per patient, well, that's just a number of professionals' time as much as anything else, which equates to that figure. The therapy sessions course, that assumes that that's more than one session, so that's for a series of interactions. And the therapy program, again, you would expect that it's so even if you increase those figures and you amortize that out over the year, you'd be at less than £2,000 a bed per week. And I know as a fact, so the Royal Beds, as an example, for acquired or traumatic brain injury rehabilitation, their beds start at £3,500 and go up to £7,500 a week. So,
Chair, can I'm very sorry to interrupt, but I just need to clarify that this service is not an inpatient service. It doesn't provide beds.
Right, okay. Even so, that's still incredibly cheap. Because if you're looking at that, that's £1,000 a week. So if you suggest, so the average bed fee at the Royal Beds, as an example, is nearly £5,000 a week. So if you said that even £3,000 a week of that was the care services provided for 24/7 care and accommodation, that's still £2,000 a week for services. And you're not at two grand a week for services, so I'm still I don't see that the figure of 800. It's almost like a wow factor figure that it's costing £800,000 per annum, but I don't think that's particularly expensive for the type of care that you're actually providing through it.
Okay. I think it's important for the committee to understand that this is not inpatient care, nor is it 24-hour care. This is an outpatient stroke day therapy type service. I just
but as I said, even if you accept that, and even if £5,000 is the Royal Beds average fee, if you take £3,000 a week off for the in-house part, and you just look at the care services provided, you'd still have the best part of £2,000 a week for those services. So therefore, on that basis, if you're just talking about the rehabilitation element rather than the 24/7 care element, you're still relatively cheap by comparison. And that's just one example. I know of many others who provide care both in-house and for day patients who are similar in terms of the cost.
Okay. Bruce or Tracy, do you want to comment on that at all?
I'm not 100% sure I'm following the comparison, because it's quite a different type of service, and we've not really been able to benchmark this because it's not the same as another service. But the therapy program that costs £34,000 is run over 18 weeks for what it's worth. So that helps if you want to try and come up with some kind of weekly cost. But for me, the most important thing at the moment here is that we don't really have any patients to see. So we've got a fixed cost of £800,000 and no one to treat.
Yeah, I get that, but what I'm trying to get to is why you haven't got any patients, and it's not. It looks from this part of your report that it's a cost issue to some degree, and I don't necessarily subscribe to that. But I'll move on and I'll let the others ask their questions. Councillor Burbidge.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that the survey that you've got in the paper is still ongoing, so you probably won't have the full results of that so far. But I was just wondering what the numbers are that you're hoping to survey through that are, whether you've had any feedback so far from patients and the public, and if I may ask the gentleman from Health Watch as well with us tonight, whether they've received any information or views from public or patients.
Okay, thank you for your question. So our governing body at the CCG approved the start of the consultation this afternoon. So it's only just begun, and therefore we don't have respondents just yet.
Thank you. Councillor Hemorrhage?
I've got two questions. How easy has it been for primary care to refer patients to this service, or has it been a really difficult referral system that those in primary care are not referring patients there because of the difficultiesness? And also, have you looked at other ways of saving money without cutting services to patients? Because I know the CCG has made some services by closing offices and doing a lot of working from home, and I know a lot of places are now working from home to actually save money. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I do apologise. I think you asked two questions. Could you repeat the first part of it?
So, how easy has it been for primary care to refer patients that need the support? Is it an easy process, or has it been a really difficult process for those in primary care to actually refer the patients, and because it being so difficult that primary care are not referring patients to the system?
Yeah, thank you. So it's a fairly routine type of referral into the service. Bruce, is there anything you want to add to that?
No, I'm not aware of that detail. Tracy might be able to add.
Sorry, I'll just add, in terms of, I'm not aware that any GPs have had any issues with it. We do have conversations with GPs when they want to check out an individual patient to see whether that patient would be appropriate for our care. So I know our clinical team do have those conversations. We've certainly not had any negative feedback about GPs not being able to refer to us. So hopefully that has answered that part of the question.
Yeah, and in terms of the second part of your question, which I completely understand, yes, of course, we're making savings in non-patient patient-facing areas, and yes, we have very substantially reduced, for example, the premises occupied by the CCG to reduce those costs. But the scale of the financial problem that we face is very significant.
Thank you. I've got some other people and I'll come back to you. Saqib?
Thank you. Unfortunately, I don't have the exact figure to hand, so apologies for that. Health Watch, as you know, we anecdotally and systematically collect data from the community, Cambridgeshire at large. I'm more than happy to come back to you guys either between the two meetings or at the next meeting with an exact figure for you.
Thank you. Okay, I've got Councillor Farouk.
Thank you, Chair. Just a brief one from me. I was just wondering if there's any, I appreciate you won't probably have the data to hand, but just the average time sort of from referral to initial assessment of a patient, and whether, if ever, these times are breached or overrun.
Okay, can I ask Tracy to comment on that, please?
So we are quite fast in terms of our response time to patients, because as you can appreciate, with the fact that we have had so few patients, that hasn't been a difficulty. There was a period in 2020 when obviously all services were, community services, elements of them were closed because of the pandemic. So there was a period then when we weren't able to treat patients, but there was always somebody within the service that could actually deal with any queries. So I don't think there's any delay in terms of patients actually going through and having an assessment done with us. But as I've said, we have had 6 patients this year who, for various reasons, have made the decision not to progress with a holistic programme, even though our clinical team have made the decision that they thought they'd be appropriate for that treatment.
Thank you. Councillor Barkham.
Thank you, Chair. I have the opportunity to mention again. It seems that we've asked the question, and yourself alluded to it as well, with regards to the reasons why there's been a reduction in referrals, and I'm not completely satisfied with the answers given. It seems very vague and almost assumptive. Can we request that an investigation does get done, or we find the reasons actually why the referrals are being reduced? Because at the moment it's simply other people are offering the service, we want to save money, but we don't really know why they're not being referred anymore, because the service is still really good and the price is still really good, which Council Ellis has referred to, but we don't know anything definitive. Can we request they do that? Is that what we could do? Or can you give a more definitive answer as to why the referrals are actually being reduced, rather than what it seems to be with respect to making some assumptions, not actually having real answers? Thank you.
Thank you for that comment and question. As with all of your questions and comments, we appreciate them, and we will take them into account as we go through this consultation process and look at them over the coming weeks to include in the final report.
Thank you. I mean, I agree with Councillor Barkham's comment. Historically, you may not have collated data, and it's something that the private sector do all the time. But when somebody is referred and doesn't take up a placement, then they ask why. And you may not have done it historically, but you've got 6 people who have been referred to you that you know have chosen not to take up the service. Is there any? Does anybody ask the question as to why? And if so, is there any pattern to it?
So can I come in, please, Chair? 'Cause I think we covered this earlier. So the 6 people we're talking about have deferred their treatment, and the reasons are either they have COVID, or they have fear of getting COVID during treatment, or they've got personal circumstances that lead them to choose to defer the treatment.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hemorrhage.
So going back to referrals, so there's lots of people out there that have got brain injuries that need this support. So how do you accept clinically those patients to actually get the support from this service? How bad has that patient got to be with their brain injury to actually get their support? Is there a line that they have to cross to get the support from that service?
So, sorry, just for clarity, are you talking about the line that has to be crossed, as you put it, for the Oliver Sandwell service, or for other services?
For the Oliver Sandwell service, how bad has that brain injury got to be for that patient to actually get the service from yourselves?
So again, I think I'll bring Tracy and Bruce in on that, but perhaps it's important to note that this is a very specialist type of approach that the Oliver Sandwell Centre takes, largely for patients about 12 months or more after the original brain injury. Anything you want to add, Tracy?
No, I was going to say there has to be a minimum of 12 months after brain injury, because obviously all the other services that are available within Cambridge and Peterborough, the client would normally be somebody with complex needs that our holistic team would then interact with them, and to get the best out of the programme work, then obviously they would need to really be in a complex situation. I think that's probably the best way to describe them.
So in reality, and this is playing devil's advocate, and you say about CPFT have got services out there, the residents that are using the service with very complex needs, if this service closed, potentially there's people out there with brain injuries, with complex needs that won't get the support that they would need after 12 months, because you say that this is a successful successful service. So something's going wrong for the service to actually close. So my guessing is that there's something wrong with the referral system. Thank you.
Okay, I'll just comment. Thank you for that point. Again, I would just say that I think there is that range of alternative services for Cambridge and Peterborough patients, which meets the reasonable needs of our population for neuro rehab.
Do I have any more questions? Councillor Ball.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would you agree that the services provided by OZC can't be fully replicated by the NHS? And I refer back to your answer a minute ago where you were talking about reasonable needs being met by the NHS. Thank you.
So, again, thank you. And this is arguably a unique service which other CCGs don't commission. And I think that's one of the findings from the 2019 review, which led us to do the more detailed work across the whole pathway. And just as an aside, part of that review has also resulted in a number of improvements around the pathway for this group of patients.
Thank you. Okay, I don't have any more questions, so thank you for your time and thank you for presenting the report. We look forward to finding out the results of the consultation.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to agenda item 6, which is pages 13 to 54, which is the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Safeguarding Adult Board Annual Report. Over to Charlotte.
Thank you very much, Chair. If I could just introduce Russell Waite. So Russell was until recently the chair of the independent chair of the Safeguarding Adults Board. I've recently taken on that role for the last couple of meetings, but I felt it would be useful for the committee to hear from Russell today. Russell's now got a slightly different role in relation to the Safeguarding Adults Board, which is that of a scrutineer. So I thought it would be best if he could introduce the item, and then I will add to that, and Debbie's also here to answer any questions you might have about how this works in practice. But just to be clear, this is a report about a multi-agency board and a multi-agency arrangement that we have around safeguarding adults.
Thank you very much, Charlotte, and hello to everybody there. I'm actually in a hotel room in Thirsk, so I would ask your forbearance in relation to the surroundings, and also the bandwidth isn't that great. But let me just introduce this item. So the Care Act of 2014 developed a statutory responsibility for there to be safeguarding adult boards in local authority areas around the country. It was recommended as guidance before the Care Act, but that made it a statutory responsibility. And as a result of that, the statutory responsibility rests with the local authority, so obviously in your case, Peterborough, but also the Chief Officer of Police for that local area, so the Chief Officer of Cambridgeshire Constabulary, and then the Chief Operating Officer for the CCG or CCGs that cover the area. So obviously we have only one CCG that covers the area for Peterborough, but also for Cambridgeshire. One of the statutory duties that the Care Act did install, the Care Act 2014, was that there should be a safeguarding adult, the Safeguarding Annual Report, Board Annual Report published, and that should be published on an annual basis. So what you've got before you today is that annual report. Those of you that have been on this committee for a while would have seen that in the past. Now, one of the things that since I handed over the chair to Charlotte, was that I do an independent scrutiny, not just for the adult board, but also for the children's board. And so for the whole year of this annual report, I think we have to bear in mind that it was done whilst COVID-19 was in place. And all I can say as the independent scrutineer in terms of what I see from practitioners, agencies, and when I'm talking of agencies, much wider agencies than those 3 statutory agencies that I mentioned, but also for the partnership, the Safeguarding Adult Board Partnership, really exceptional performance in order to do as much safeguarding as that they possibly can in person where they can, but also do it remotely as best that they can. And then just a couple of things to highlight for you. The main priority that the board have is making safeguarding personal for those that need help and protection and care needs, is making sure that their wishes are one of the things that they really focus on. And I saw that certainly a culture change over the last few years, that making safeguarding personal is what practitioners think about when they're thinking about the vulnerable adults that they work with. So one of the other responsibilities, statutory responsibilities, is that there should be something called a SAR, so that's a Safeguarding Adult Review, that takes place in relation to the most serious offences, cases where there is abuse or neglect known or suspected in an adult. And as a result of that, there has been a number of Safeguarding Adult Reviews that have been concluded within this period, and that's continuing on to this day. So lots of activity and lots of learning, and some of the learning themes that come out of that is highlighted in the report. For example, hoarding is one of the examples. So I found as the independent scrutineer that the Safeguarding Adult Board did achieve its statutory objectives, was well managed and well run. I went to a couple of meetings. They also have a thing called a QEG, which is the Quality Effectiveness Group, and that was also well run. The SAR has an independent chair who provides independent scrutiny throughout the whole process in relation to serious cases, and he's very able and capable. And again, I found that to be a real good asset for the partnership. So I think that's me covered the independent scrutiny that took place. If I hand back to Charlotte, please.
Thanks, Russell. And the only other thing I was going to add actually is just one of the questions we often have to deal with is, when is something safeguarding and when is it not safeguarding? And you'll see in the report that we have what I would describe as we cast the net quite wide. So we have the multi-agency safeguarding hub, and we encourage anyone who has any concerns to contact that group of people who work really closely with the police and with other partners if they have anything that they think may be a safeguarding concern. Now, inevitably, lots of things come through that route which aren't necessarily a safeguarding concern, don't warrant what we call a Section 42 inquiry. So the report does include some statistics about that for Peterborough. And we are really key. We do see that as a kind of positive, that actually, although we get quite a large number of inquiries, the number that actually get converted into a formal Section 42 inquiry or investigation is much lower, because we think that means that people know where to go, they know who to contact, but equally our response is a proportionate one. So that was the only other thing I think that I wanted to add. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Charlotte, and thank you, Russell. Do I have any questions? Councillor Kyan.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the annual report. I actually took a great deal of interest in some of the case reviews that were highlighted, in particular Claire's story on page 32, Alice and Peter. I do have some feedback, obviously being a partner to some of these referrals, and I think that in terms of the multi-agency hub, there needs to be a lot more communication. Often, a safeguarding lead will receive a letter to an invitation to these review meetings after the meeting has actually taken place, so that might be one thing to have a look at, please. And the other thing is accessibility to mental health services. Some of these cases also highlighted women who were subjected to domestic violence, and we have no women's aid in Peterborough, and I have been faced with patients who I cannot seek a refuge place for because they are in danger. This obviously impacts on the workload during the day, and it's dangerous from a safety perspective, especially if she has a partner who is threatening. The other thing that I'd noticed, and I'd like to ask a question specifically about, is that within the report there is nothing that really reflects the diversity of Peterborough in particular, when we know that we've had 2 Eastern European women who were killed in the last 2 years, and I was wondering why that is, and what services we have for them as well, and whether this has been looked at too. Thank you.
So, Charlotte, could I just go with the Lithuanian cases? Is that okay? I have carried out a couple of reviews. So that actually, those cases that you've referred to are not safeguarding adult reviews, albeit what you're highlighting would fit that definition. The best place that they sat was as domestic homicide reviews. Now, they're not managed by the Safeguarding Adult Board, so the Safeguarding Adult Board Partnership. They're managed by our Safer Peterborough Partnership, and so that's where they sit. And there has been a really good level of learning from those, because also just not far from Peterborough in Wisbech, there's been also another 2 Eastern European deaths of Lithuanians that also had a domestic homicide review. And I think you made a good point, is that we do need to join up some of the learning from domestic homicide reviews, because obviously they are adults that are vulnerable, that have been had their lives taken from them, with some of the learning that we pick up through safeguarding adult reviews. So I think that's a really good point in terms of us learning as a partnership, us learning as a city in Peterborough.
And just in terms of the challenge about diversity, I think that's a very fair comment, actually. I think we can reflect that much better in future reports, and also reflect the diversity of services that's available in Peterborough.
That's excellent, thank you. I think people who are vulnerable adults who have English as a second language find it particularly difficult to access primary care, so I'm really grateful for you taking that back. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do I have any more questions? Councillor Bull?
Thank you, Chair. My question follows on neatly from the previous questioner. How are the lessons learnt from the cases of Simon, Claire, Alice, Dorothy, Peter and Alan being not only documented but put into practice? And I appreciate that training has mainly been online due to the pandemic in 2020-21, to which this report refers. But the mantra, as you rightly say, is making adult safeguarding personal. How is that truly being achieved? How is the bottom line delivery being achieved? Rather than talking a good talk, how is that talk being walked? Thank you.
Charlotte, do you want me to start with that one?
Please do, Russell.
So what happens with the safeguarding adult reviews? And absolutely, you make the point about training being online. One of the aspects of training that it being online has worked out really, really well is some training which you would have seen in the report and mentioned in the report called SWAY. Now that has now been viewed, the sways, by 42,000 plus people. So that training is getting really far-reaching and getting out into voluntary sector as well as statutory agencies, etc. So I think that's a really, really powerful message. Nowhere in the country delivers training to that sort of level, and a number of other areas have been desperate to find out about sway as a good practice. Now, one of the things that comes out of safeguarding adult reviews isn't just about training. So what has happened is there's been policy guidance and trying to bring about some culture changes. So when we talk about making safeguarding personal, that has been the case. So there is a lot more work to be done. You said about walking, instead of talking the talk, walk the walk. The current safeguarding adult reviews that are in the process of being finished, and I think Charlotte's chairing a board later this month, if not early February, that's looking at 4 safeguarding adult reviews. You can see within those reviews and those independent examinations of them that changes have taken place to practice. So that's a positive aspect that we should acknowledge. But I we can't not agree that a lot more should be done. And one of the aspects that has been done and is working is the voice of the adult, and learning in relation to the voice of the adult and listening to the voice of the adult, which includes adults where people can't speak for themselves, other adults that speak for them. And so there's been a lot of work being done there, and the evidence that work is starting to bite home is coming through and can be seen by these latest reviews that are going to be just shortly finalised.
Thank you very much.
And can I just add to that? So I absolutely agree. I think it's really important that with every safeguarding adult review, there's a really clear action plan and that we completely hold ourselves to account. And we have a very rigorous process for that within the Safeguarding Adult Board, because we're aware how busy it is. Things are, and people have a lot of issues to deal with, but we do have a really clear process and a subgroup that sits underneath the board. And Jo Proctor, who would normally be here today but is on leave, who oversees that process, it's her main focus really, is to make sure that we're doing that.
Thank you, Charlotte.
Debbie?
I don't know. Oh, yes, it is working. And if I can just add to that, so as well as the work of the partnership boards and the subgroups, so each of the partners has a responsibility. So, for example, social care, we have to look at those recommendations. We have to develop our own action plan. That goes through the Practice Governance Board, and the Practice Governance Board is chaired by the Assistant Director for Adults and Safeguarding. And we, on a monthly basis, will review that work and make sure that it's implemented. And alongside of that, we will do audits to ensure that all the work, all the practice guidance that we've done with our frontline practitioners is being embedded. So it's not just the responsibility of that, it doesn't just sit with the board, it's for every agency to take that away and make sure that that gets embedded.
I'm grateful, thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. I've got Councillor Barkham.
Thank you, Chair. An example from this paper, if we just use Claire, for example, it's obviously a horrific story of the result. It seems like she's been failed from a number of levels. So the question is really, they said here learning from this review includes, and they're going to try and learn from the mistakes, but this was in 2017. I suspect the health professional organisation has previous data on examples of this type. Would they not have learned from previous examples rather than just deciding to learn from this one and then potentially putting some small changes in place? Certainly with regards to what is clearly a person who's got mental health problems being delivered, it seems news that her children are not going to be returned and subsequently takes her own life. That, I don't think, is something that would need medical professional expertise to deliver that news without considering first what's the potential risks of giving this to a person who, again, is clearly suffered and is experiencing mental health difficulties? So, first of all, why did they not know this information already? And what is being done specifically to ensure that this doesn't happen again? So I just want to clarify that point. Would this person, or has this person, would these people in these scenarios be offered some form of trauma therapy or some help, rather than just looking at the home environment? This isn't great, your children are not safe, they're going to be removed. But was this person offered any trauma therapy, for example, with psychologists? That will be the second part of the question. Thank you.
Debbie.
Okay, so I mean, it doesn't really. I mean, this is a really brief summary, and the full report will be published. But I think in the situation, it was a very complex situation. You're absolutely right in terms of her mental health. That wasn't the focus. At times, Claire was really quite well and presented well. But I think if you look at the summary, clearly there was a lack of communication between the agencies at times that were working with Claire, and there were opportunities that were missed. So I think, you know, and it is a really sad situation, from every situation we have learnt from this, and there are clear recommendations in terms of the mental health support, you know, whether it would be trauma therapy, whatever that might be. You know, sat here, I'm not the expert in mental health, but, you know, CPFT colleagues have been involved, and it is about how we would support individuals if they're willing to accept that support. That's the other dilemma you're often faced with, because when people are well, they decline that level of support, and it's only when they go into mental health crisis that you can make some decisions without somebody's full consent, because actually they're unable to make those decisions for themselves. So that probably doesn't answer the question directly, but you know, for every safeguarding adult review we have, we look at all of the recommendations, and as I say, this is just a really brief summary to give committee an idea of the cases that we have looked at over this last period of time. Don't know if Charlotte or Russell want to add to that.
I can just add I'm bouncing off something, a small piece. Yeah, just to say that one of the strengths that we have locally is in relation to the executive board being a board that has children and adults. So it looks holistically at both of those. So issues like this one where our children were taken off would be discussed at that level to make sure that those that work in children's services think about the adult and the impact on the adult as well. So I think that's a strength and something that we should continue to support.
Sorry, can I just add as well? I think inevitably, if something warrants being a safeguarding adult review, it's a really quite a serious case, and so inevitably all of these stories, whenever I read them, I always have those questions about, well, why didn't that happen, you know, why didn't we do something different? But that is the very purpose of the exercise, is to ask those questions and answer them in a way that generates learning rather than blame. So I don't think I've ever once read a safeguarding adult review report without feeling sort of, you know, shocked and concerned that these situations happen. But inevitably, the world of adult social care, we do come across some very complex situations and very complex people, but it's really important that we recognise that we don't always get it right, and we have to learn, and it's almost always a multi-agency learning point. It's very rare for it to be just one organisation, which is why we have this process. And a common theme, and I'm sure Russell would agree, in terms of also children's safeguarding reviews, is information sharing is always a really common theme, which is why we're so keen to make changes in that area.
Thank you, Charlotte. Councillor Kayam, and then I'll come back to you, Simon.
Thank you, Chair. I think reading the report all in all, I'd like to make a recommendation regarding accessibility to mental health services, which is a common theme throughout, and especially in some of these case review reports. I know that in primary care, most GPs won't be well versed with assessing mental capacity for complex mental health needs, such as those individuals who are vulnerable, subject to safeguarding with services, and also have influence of alcohol misuse, for example, related with mental health problems, and may also be taking substance misuse. And I think the frustration is that they currently get bounced from pillar to post, often end up in accident and emergency, and are having to be babysat by police and other agencies such as primary care, and valuable time is lost. I think due attention needs to be given to the accessibility aspect, and it would be, I think, very useful for the Adult Safeguarding Board to feed the accessibility aspect back to mental health services, because I often find that their thresholds are very, very high when it comes to referring these service users to them. Or often we don't have the service whereby an individual can be assessed collaboratively for their mental health, and they have an underlying alcohol and substance misuse problem as well. So that's just something that I've found in the report too. Thank you.
Certainly happy to feed that back into our discussions. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Barkham.
Councillor Keogh has so eloquently put it for me. Thank you.
Do I have any more questions? Councillor Ball.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to hark back on to a report we had a few years ago when I sat on this panel, scrutiny panel committee. I just want to ask what's happening on managing allegations against people in positions of trust, where you have adults moving across local authority boundaries and keeping multi-agency services informed in a timely manner. I know that that was certainly an issue a few years ago.
Rather than give a vague answer, I think I'd like to take the question away and answer it properly, unless Debbie or Russell are able to provide a detailed answer.
Well, I mean, all I can say that we have got a policy and a process in place now, so that we do manage that, but that's more of an internal process for the local authority in terms of people in positions of trust. I guess the wider question would sit with the Safeguarding Adults Board. I mean, that policy is system-wide, but I couldn't answer on behalf of the other partners. So I think you're right, Charlotte. I think we do probably need to take that away.
Yeah, and from my point of view, I absolutely agree that there is a policy and procedure in place for safeguarding adults, which goes across all of the agencies involved. But I agree that I think there's a lot more work that needs to be done. We have had issues in the past, which is quite rightly highlighted by the councillor, and I think those issues haven't gone away, in particular with agency working and making sure that we're getting all of our care agencies as well as providers, making sure that they are checking before they employ people. And I think with the current employment issues at the moment, we do need to make sure we're putting that message out a lot stronger again. So that's a really good point.
Thank you. Any more questions? Councillor Farouk.
Thank you, Chair. It's just regarding pages 36 and 37, the Learning Disabilities Mortality Review Programme, which sort of highlights or looks into the reasons why people with learning disabilities die earlier than the general population. On the top of page 37, there's a sort of table there of 30 completed reviews, showing roughly about 40% of these reviews show that the care fell short of expected good practice, and in certainly 5 of those reviews that could be attributed to the cause of death in those patients. So If any, what early indications do we have that this programme is preventing these sort of shortfalls in care happening again? Yeah, thank you.
So, okay.
Go on, Russell. Go for it, Russell.
I was just going to say that one of the problems that we've had, and we've raised that as a critical area of practices, that are learning disability mortality reviews. And Charlotte actually in particular has really pushed for us to bring that programme online. Had not been taking place as they should have been, but over the last 18 months and for the whole of this annual report period, they have been, but they've been playing catch up. So we are now in a position with that Partnership for Learning Disability Mortality Reviews in a place to now try and drive forward changes. It was all about making sure that we've got through the reviews with the coroner, but we're now at a place that we can bring about some changes. So I'm really hopeful, and hopefully next year's report will be different in relation to that. Charlotte.
Yeah, I was just going to say something really similar, actually. One thing just to give us some sense of encouragement is that the CCG, who has a lead responsibility in this area, has not only got the whole process rolling, which was very much needed, but also we had a recent kind of what we called a summit, which was organised by Carol Anderson, the Director of Nursing, to really review all our arrangements around people with learning disabilities, because particularly looking at the way in which they are treated particularly when in hospital, where often things will be missed when they shouldn't be missed. So I think there's a real willingness to learn actually so I mean, it's one thing doing the reviews, it's another thing changing our practice, and I think that there's been a shift, I think, in the awareness and the prioritisation of that as an issue. And Safeguarding Adult Board has really helped to achieve that.
Thank you. Any more questions? Nope. Well, I'll summarise with my own comment. It's not a question. From somebody who, as you well know, has regularly sat on the other side of the table. I've been involved in case reviews and safeguarding issues for the last 10 years, and I have to say that in the last 10 years, whilst I don't think you're anywhere near the finished article, adult safeguarding through the mashes of Peterborough and Cambridge is in a better place than it was when I first got involved with them. So, well done. Keep it up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Move on to agenda item 7. Which is the portfolio progress report from the Cabinet Member for Adult Social Care, Health and Public Health, including the Adult Services Self-Assessment. You wouldn't want that on a business card, would you? Good evening, Councillor Walsh.
Good evening. Shall I kick off?
Yeah, obviously we've all got your report, so I'm conscious of time, but I'm also conscious of people having the opportunity to ask questions rather than a reiteration of the report. So if you have any headline points that you'd like to mention, or if there's anything new that's not included in the detail that you would like in the report, then if you could bring those, that would be fantastic. And then I'd like to open the floor for questions.
Yeah, I absolutely take your point, and so my introduction for that very reason is pretty brief. I'll just touch on one or two things, and I have officers here who would also like to draw emphasis around certain items as well. But I appreciate, the questions will come, and they're important. So first of all, good evening, and I'm pleased to have this opportunity to present this annual report. It's the first one that I'm doing as holder of this portfolio. As we've said, you will have read it. And just first of all, COVID, which has impacted our lives so much since the beginning of this pandemic. And the information provided in the report, whilst accurate at the time, as you all know, no doubt, by watching the news daily, as we all do, it has now been superseded by fresh data, and our Director of Public Health has come armed with the latest information. If you would like her to present that, I'm sure she'll be most willing. The number of incidents in all age groups has increased in the last week, but in Peterborough remains below the national average, so that's positive news. Hospitalisations are nowhere near last year's figures. However, they're still concerning, and sadly in the last 28 days, 9 deaths have occurred in Peterborough. There is a need for vaccination levels to improve in Peterborough, and this will become increasingly important as restrictions ease and the country moves out of the pandemic and towards the endemic phase. The enhanced response area status that we were granted on November 1st enabled additional support to be given, and this had a positive effect, but we must continue with our concerted effort to make available opportunities for people to get vaccinated, and of course to persuade those who are hesitant to come forward for their jab. But more on this from Jyoti. The report before you gives some details on the ongoing commissioned activity, and I won't list them here because they're all in the report. Item 4.7, the report on the Adult Social Care Annual Self-Assessment, describes the process in headlines from the annual self-assessment process, and this includes a process of external challenge. The self-assessment sets out key achievements as well as key risks and challenges. I think it's a positive report, and I hope you'll think so also. Item 8 of the report provides an update on the final year of the Adult Social Care Transformation Programme, referred to as the Adults Positive Challenge, an important approach. There is also information provided on how the Council has made use of the social care specific COVID-19 grants received from central government to support social care providers, and this has been tremendously important to keep the market going. So I'm not going to say any more because, as I understand, Chair, you want this brief, you want time for questions, so I will just simply hand over to officers to add a little bit of detail to what I have said, and then leave it in your hands. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think Jyoti wanted to give us a few points. If you...
Just because Irene's still got hers on.
So, it's working now. Great,
Irene,
thank
can
you.
turn your mic off?
Rather than repeat what's already in the report and to allow time for questions, I will just give an update on the COVID situation further to the report being produced. So I'm sure if you're all following the news, it won't have escaped your attention that COVID rates are rising dramatically. What we're seeing at the moment is subject to changes in behaviours over Christmas. People did mix a lot more, which drove up rates, but also variations in testing. So testing uptake is lower on Christmas, around Christmas, the bank holidays and the New Year period, but there's corresponding peaks in testing on the 29th of January and the 3rd and the 4th, sorry, the 29th of December and the 3rd and the 4th of January, also corresponding with children returning to school. We're also seeing nationally an increase in deaths, and deaths in the last 7 days have increased 30%, and hospital admissions have increased by 57% nationally. Locally, we've also seen that variation in testing uptake, and that will, of course, impact on our figures, which have fluctuated in line with the changes in testing uptake. At the moment, rates in Peterborough are below, but only just below the East of England average, and are also below the England average, but are rising for all ages and also rising for the over 60s. In fact, the rates that we're seeing now are the highest that we've ever seen, and considerably higher than the rates that we saw in January. Rates in Peterborough for all ages are 1,749, and for over 60s are 917 per 100,000. That is a very high rate for the over 60s, and that is what's worrying me for the weeks ahead. We know that as rates in over 60s rise, there's a 2 to 3 week lag. It then impacts on hospitalisations, and 2 to 3 weeks after that it impacts on death. So we're yet to see the full impact of these increasing rates on our hospitalisations and deaths. We are starting to see the impact on hospitalisations that are now creeping up, and at about a third of the hospital admissions that we saw in January. Of course, I think it was Councillor Elsey that said the impact is much lower. So for all the cases that we're seeing, there's a much lower proportion that are ending up in hospital. But with such high rates in the over 60s, I would expect hospitalisations to continue to move upwards, and I would expect an impact on deaths in about 2 to 3 weeks' time. In terms of good news, there is a little bit of good news. Uptake of vaccinations continues to go up. We've seen booster rates increase, now at a slower rate than we saw just before Christmas, but they are still increasing. And in fact, we're seeing first doses continue to increase. So I think there is merit in focusing on driving up vaccination coverage, first, second and booster doses across Peterborough. And we know that there's a 10% gap between Peterborough coverage and the national coverage. So I think that's an area that's ripe for continued efforts, and we have had continued efforts in the December period with the Surge Rapid Response team around Peterborough, driving up, knocking on doors, driving up uptake as part of our enhanced response area response that we received. I'm happy to take questions on what I've presented.
Thank you. The first question is Councillor Hemmerich.
Hi, I've got 3 quick questions. One is 4.66, the drug and alcohol treatment service. Concerning that the numbers are falling, yeah, I guess that because of COVID. But what are we doing to try and promote the services? Because obviously we won't want that service to disappear, because it is a well-used service. And also on 4.79, you talk about more people on, and the list goes on. So what does that mean about more people? So is there fewer admissions to care homes? What's the understanding on this? And with more people living in their homes, I know this is a good thing, but are they still receiving support after 91 days? Thank you.
So apologies, I'm not sure if adult did you want to say something else other than what I'd said by way of introduction?
No, I'm happy to take comments. I think Councillor Walsh covered it.
For the first question, Val might want to come in.
Just keep. I've got to hold it. Right. Okay. Apologies for that. Sorry for the delay.
Yes, I think the question in relation to increasing the number of people who access our drug and alcohol services, I think the 12 to 18-year-olds have very much been affected by the school situation because the service actually received a lot of referrals. There's a lot of outreach work amongst young people that's been undertaken as a way to address that, and particularly that 12 to 18-year-olds. I think we are using sort of school in reach as well, but it very much depends on how quickly the schools resume to normal. There have been so many sort of school closures and so many stresses upon schools that it's been very difficult. But we are maintaining that in reach into schools wherever possible, talking to young people, doing it as safely as we possibly can. I think with the adult question that you raise, I think that it's quite a complicated picture because many of the people that are presenting are much more complex and have many more complex issues, particularly in terms of mental health, the impact of COVID, the isolation and so forth. So it's dealing with that complexity. And we have strengthened the recovery service to give additional support. I think what isn't mentioned in here, we have been given additional funding, national funding, to work with homeless services and to work with the criminal justice system. We know that a lot of people being released from the criminal justice system, they have to be picked up quite quickly, and that additional resources enable us to pick those people up more quickly. Similarly, we now have recruited, we have had recruitment difficulties in getting people to provide these new services. We are working closely with the homelessness teams and the street outreach team so that we can identify people who do need that additional support and encourage them and support them into services. But we find that it is very challenging now because of the complexity of issues that people have, very much due to the isolation created by COVID.
Thank you. Councillor Kayam.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Walsh, for taking up this position. I think it's a very challenging set of circumstances that we're seeing at the moment. Very simple question, actually. Jyoti, do we know whether the cases that are rising currently are because of children going back to school, or is it too early to say as yet? And I know that Jonathan Lewis gives us some really useful updates on a weekly basis, so I was wondering whether that's been reflected in the current case rates as yet. Thank you.
Sure, I can describe what's happened. So before the Christmas break, rates were particularly high in the school-age population, and that was driven by Delta, not Omicron. That's dropped down over the Christmas period due to the kids being at home. But in the meantime, we've seen Omicron go up in the working-age population. Over the Christmas period, they're still highest in that 20 to 39 age population. But now that the kids are back, we're starting to see an increase in rates in the 10 to 19-year-old group. And I think that's now been driven by Omicron is the predominant variant now. Okay.
Councillor Farouk.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Walsh and Jyoti, for your comments, and your detailed reports as well. Just a quick question for you, Jyoti. In terms of, you mentioned some figures for the amount of hospitalisations at the minute, and particularly for the more severe cases in ITU. Do we have any data to hand about how many of these cases are patients who have not been vaccinated at all?
I don't have that data to hand, but I would expect that more and more of the cases that are in hospital have actually been vaccinated, and that's not an indication of vaccine failure. That's entirely to be expected, and that's because most of our older population have been vaccinated and in fact have had 3 doses. It's just that we know that the vaccine is not 100% effective, and if you have other vulnerabilities, that will make you more vulnerable to COVID. Just to expand a little bit on what's going on in hospitals, anyone who tests positive in hospital will be counted as a COVID hospital admission. Many cases are coming in for other reasons, but then are testing positive for COVID, because we've got very high rates of community transmission. Again, you would expect that with high background rates of community transmission. Some are coming, some are catching COVID in hospital as well. So, we've got nosocomial infection going on as well. And there are, of course, a group that are coming in and needing treatment because of their COVID. And all of those factors are part of the stats that we're seeing. And then on top of that, we've got the staffing impact. When community rates are high, it also impacts on staff or their children, and they're having to stay at home with children. And sickness absence rates in hospitals are high. And of course, when you've got people in with COVID, it increases the pressure on the system, because there's got to be distancing and enhanced cleaning, infection prevention measures put in, etc. So all of these factors coming together are causing immense pressure on our hospital services. It's also actually impacting on primary care now, because we're seeing lower levels of impact of COVID. Not everyone's ending up in hospital, and it's also putting pressure on primary care.
Thank you, Chair. Just to follow up, if I may, just a very quick one. So in the sense like how we do with pneumonia, for example, is there any scope or any feasibility to have cases sort of, divided by either hospital-acquired or community-acquired COVID?
Not at the moment, but I can see if that's available through the health service. I'll ask that question.
I do apologise, I missed that question. Could you just repeat it, please?
Whether there's any feasibility to have COVID cases in hospitals, either divided into community-acquired or hospital-acquired.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Burbidge.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick one from me. Just to ask how long you see the enhanced response status staying in place for Peterborough?
The enhanced response status ended on the 24th of December, and I wouldn't envisage just applying again, because actually all of the measures that we had through the ERA are now part of the National Plan B.
Thank you. I've got a question for you, Jyoti, and then I've got some other questions for Councillor Walsh. In view of the question I've asked you before, you know that I'm not a lover of statistics, because they can be manipulated to say whatever you want them to say, and I'm not suggesting you're manipulating them. I'll clarify that. But it irritates me that, and I'm not belittling COVID in any way, shape or form, but it irritates me that anybody who dies within 28 days of a positive test for COVID is put down as a COVID death, when somebody could quite easily have quite clearly died of a heart attack, which had nothing to do with COVID whatsoever, but it's a COVID death. So my question to you is, how many deaths have we had in the last 12 months from flu, which kills people every year? Because I've seen not one case of a flu death reported anywhere.
I think flu transmission's been fairly low this year, and that's partly because people are still socially distancing or working from home, particularly with Plan B coming in. Flu isn't as high as it would normally be.
But I'd just like to add
that kind of I accept what you're saying, but I kind of don't, because if COVID is a form of flu, yeah, it's from the same family ish. If that's being passed by people being too close together and mixing, then there's the same potential for flu to do the same. So,
except that it might be more transmissible than flu.
Sure, I understand that, but you get my point. It just irritates me that every death within a 28-day positive test is put down as a COVID death, and it's nonsense.
If I can just intervene there, Chair, I think you may have noticed that in the media now, the reporting on statistics, the wording, whereas it used to be of COVID, now tends to be with COVID. And so this opens up your point there, that some people had other illnesses which could have been the major cause of their death, and their death may have been brought forward because of acquiring COVID, or may not. They may simply have been recorded as people who died with COVID. So it is very much a, let's say, unclear. And the point is that everyone's being tested for COVID. And so this comes out in the figures. And I know there's a national debate about this and how it should be presented. So, you know, there is a change as we move towards it being endemic, not pandemic. I think that we're not going to have this nightly report that we get on the news. But certainly there's a change in the language, and I'm sure you'll have noticed it yourself.
I have on some media outlets, not on all. Do I have any more questions for Jyoti's part specifically, or shall we move on to the rest of the report? Councillor Bull.
Just a quick one for Jyoti. It's on page 65, the financial implications. Central government have obviously granted a lot of money for COVID recovery, COVID test and trace and the like. If this money isn't spent, do we have to refund it to central government? Because it's kind of important that government continues to monitor the situation, both in the short term and long term, particularly in Peterborough, for all the reasons we've rehearsed in previous committee meetings, so that we remain resilient in terms of combating the pandemic as it is and moving to the endemic, as Councillor Walsh alluded to. So has this money been, if it's being taken away, has this money been reflected in our December 2021 local government settlement? Thank you.
We've been given confirmation that we can carry forward the COVID Outbreak Management Fund until next year. We don't yet know whether, if we don't spend it next year, they will claw any of the remaining money back. We'd seek clarification on that point.
Thank you.
June.
I have a couple of other questions, not really relevant to Jyoti. Can I go ahead and ask them? Thank you, Mr. Chair. My first question is a simple one. It concerns engagement on page 60, paragraph 4.6.8. Are these key issues now under control, and or are they being rectified? And my second question relates to page 90, the Adult Social Care Outcomes Framework. The last 5 bullet points showing Peterborough did worse than the regional average. What's happening to resolve these issues? Thank you.
Okay, so if I respond to the first question, so yeah, in terms of the survey and the report that Healthwatch did on our behalf, those issues have been addressed. So we worked really closely with Healthwatch and partners to develop some really good leaflets and information for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. They were signed off by Healthwatch because we wanted to make sure that they, were included in the work that we did. That worked particularly well for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough patients. What didn't work as well, the hospitals fed back to us, well, that's great for your patients, but what about the patients that come in from Lincolnshire? And for Cambridgeshire, it's much wider. So we did some further work and adapted that leaflet and made sure that the key links for all of those organisations, so like the Care Choices, was represented in a separate leaflet. So the acute trusts, regardless of who they're working with and where that patient comes from, have the right information. So yes, we have addressed that.
So I'm going to pick up your second question around the areas we did less well. I'll start with the bottom 3 because they're from the service user survey, which didn't actually run for the last 2 years because of COVID, and just literally about to go out again on the 19th of January to our long-term service users. So then we may get different responses, but I'll quickly say the satisfaction one is an interesting one because to be positive, people have to respond they're extremely or very satisfied. We actually have lower rates of that, higher rates of people being quite satisfied, and much lower rates of people being extremely dissatisfied or very dissatisfied. So it is a difficult one to unpick, and I'll be interested to see what we get back this time. The choice and control, there's actually quite a lot of things happening and have been happening over the sort of recent years, and it links really strongly in with our Adult Positive Challenge programme. So all of our strengths and asset-based working, all of the work we've been doing around trying to give people more choice and control, hopefully we'll see a positive impact on that one. And then the fewer people saying services make them feel safe is an odd one too, because actually we have more people feeling safe. And so you might argue that if you feel safe, the service you're getting is not likely to be a factor in making you feel safe if you're already feeling safe. But what I would say as well is, because historically we've always been a bit lower on that, we did do some work 2 sort of surveys ago to ask people an additional question around what was it that made them feel unsafe. And it was generally a fear of falling either inside their house or outside of their house. So we have also been doing some work with our public health colleagues and our falls prevention services. Unfortunately, because of COVID, some of the real innovative stuff got put on hold a bit, but that is due to start again in April with some sort of clearer falls referral pathways and some more intensive work around that. So that's those 2. And then the learning disabilities and employment, that will link in with our day opportunities review that we're currently doing around the different ways that we can support people with learning disabilities with meaningful daytime opportunities. The reablement one, the fact that we do have proportionately fewer people going from hospital into reablement, and that is again something else we're looking at and how we can optimise the reablement service to really target people well, although we do also want to encourage that service to take people from the community as well. So it isn't just a service for people from hospital. We want people who may benefit from the community to be able to be referred into that too. So it is a balance.
Thank you. If I can ask a question, it relates to page 60. It's kind of 3-part, but it covers 4.6.7 and 4.6.8. Going back to my love of statistics and surveys, especially when you see adverts for leading cosmetic companies who say 79% of the people surveyed, and then at the bottom you see that they surveyed 200 people out of the whole of the UK population. Can I ask, on 4.6.7, in both the points it says 3 and 4 people. Well, if that was only 4 people, that's only 3 people. So can we have some context around how many people were actually surveyed, how many responses we got? And then on 4.6.8, it starts with a significant number. Can you tell me what defines a significant number? Is that 10, 20, 50, 2,000?
Okay, I should remember the numbers, but I don't, and I will get back to you. But it was a very small survey, and the reason it was a small survey, and the figure of it's something between 40 and 50, and the reason it was a small survey is because we wanted what we agreed with Healthwatch is, rather than a usual survey when you send an information form out and people fill it in and they either return it or they don't. These people were contacted directly because we commissioned the survey based on the Healthwatch national survey, and we just wanted to understand in our system if the themes that came out of the national survey report were similar, and they were, but we wanted Healthwatch, and that's the approach they agreed to take, to actually speak to people, and the people were kind of chosen so that we had a mixture of people that had gone home on a health pathway, a social care pathway, or with a voluntary sector. So it was a small cohort, but actually what it told us, even though there were small numbers, that it was in line with the national survey that Healthwatch had done. So when you say, 3 and 4, that's 3 and 4 of potentially 40, whatever that percentage is, that's not my strength, but yeah, so it was a small number, but hopefully that provides some context.
Thank you. Anybody else? If not, I've got a question on page 61. under it's under performance, and I'm really pleased to see that we're ahead of the curve on so many bullet points. But the 4.710, there are two areas that we're not performing quite as well. Can I ask what's being done to address these?
I think those were the points I just responded to earlier. So that was the learning disability employment and the short-term engagement support.
Okay. And then my final question is on page 62, under 4.712, under the first box of the table, you're talking about using PAMs more. That works for a certain cohort of people. How does that affect spot purchase? Because there's a lot of spot purchase that happens. And what impact is this work that you're doing under that point having on the overall pricing that you're obtaining in terms of bed placements?
So in terms of using PAMs, whether we spot purchase or not, it's whether we contract with that independent provider. So where we contract, whether it's a spot purchase or a block purchase, the contracts team would use that tool. In terms of price, I don't think it, the two don't sort of necessarily align. To be perfectly honest, during the pandemic, the cost of placements has increased. We are working really closely with the market to manage the cost and the demand, but the reality is, the market is dealing with more complex individuals. Whether we're talking about adults with a learning disability, older people, their needs are becoming more complex. Our priority is always to support people at home if that's at all possible. But when it gets to that point where we can't, then it would be looking at, a placement. So, but, we've definitely seen an increase in the cost, but that work is underway with, Will is leading that in terms of commissioning, etc. Don't know if...
Yes, it might also be worth me adding that as part of the sort of wider regional work, there has been some work with the LGA as well around trying to understand better the real cost of home care and what's a reasonable price for home care, recognising that we're all struggling with the home care market. So I think engaging with our regional colleagues just helps maximise the level of intelligence and knowledge and expertise that we can bring to bear on that, because certainly as a lone local authority we can't access the level of skills and knowledge that we can collaboratively.
Thank you. Councillor Raleigh.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of equalities, we have a diverse population, Peterborough, and note that in 9.3 recognise that outcomes for COVID-19 have been worse for older people and people from BAME, ethnic minority communities and deprived areas. How challenging is that still proving, and what are we doing to mitigate that? And also in terms of hospitalization and deaths, are certain communities overrepresented in compared to the indigenous population? So how are we tackling the inequalities that we recognize, but are we actually getting up to speed with these things so that communities are coming forward, they're getting vaccinated, they're taking the right precautions? Are we investing the time and effort with those communities?
We're investing, firstly, to address the question about variation. Yes, there is variation. It's highlighted in the report, and it's to do with a number of different reasons, including pre-existing structural inequalities. For example, living in more densely populated areas, BAME communities and poorer communities tend to live in more densely populated areas. That increases their risk of catching COVID. They tend to have to go out to work, which also increases their risk of catching COVID. So there are some underlying structural issues behind why they're more likely to catch COVID, but also why they're more likely to have a poorer experience, and that's because they are more likely to have other underlying health conditions due to, for other reasons. There is absolutely, I can assure you, there's enormous effort going on into increasing uptake in our BAME populations and our more deprived populations, including knocking on people's doors where we've got poor uptake, going to places of worship, etc. I think where there are variations in vaccine uptake by ethnicity, and I think it's particularly low for our Eastern European population in Peterborough, and I think that's where we have been putting an awful lot of effort, including going to workplaces where we think there's a high representation of Eastern Europeans in those particular workplaces. So I can only assure you that there's been an enormous effort, and I think the fact that the rates are continuing to go up, including first doses, demonstrates that that is having some impact and is worth continuing with and pursuing.
Councillor Farouk.
Thank you, Chair. Just a final one from me. In the vaccination hubs at hospitals, for example, or wherever they may be, it might, or certainly did used to get to a period where at the end of the day, if there were vaccines left over, it would sort of on a first come first served basis be offered to people who haven't necessarily had an appointment. Is this still being offered, and also up until what age group is this offered? Is, for example, for early booster vaccines to bypass the however many weeks patients or people receiving vaccines would usually wait? Is this sort of a adults only offer, or is it offered to children as well? Or
sorry, I'm not entirely clear on the question. Are you asking, are there walk-in opportunities?
Yeah, specifically for people who are still within their weekly wait for their booster vaccine. Is it 8 weeks or 12 weeks?
So they haven't reached the 12-week.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry. Yeah.
No, I think that's being adhered to. The 12-week gap is being adhered to. There haven't been walk-ins. The situation is changing because of the change in government policy and the need to get a lot of people boosted very quickly. There was a change from the walk-ins to more appointment delivered options, and that's to maximise the vaccinator resource, to maximise the number of people that could be vaccinated by the vaccinators. And there were queues for people, at the beginning there were queues of people waiting to be vaccinated, and they wanted to make sure they could get as many people through as possible. They're now moving back again to offering walk-ins now, because there's not as much pressure on the vaccination resource, there's not as many people coming, and in fact there's a lot of slots going unused and vacant. So they are going to now reintroduce walk-ins. Also the bus and the outreach stopped, and that was again to maximise the vaccination resource to get as many people through as quickly as possible. That will be brought back in. We're planning to bring that back in towards the end of January, so that we'll get that outreach going again. I hope that's answered your question.
So just to clarify, those walk-ins now being offered, that still wouldn't allow people to bypass the however many weeks you have to wait?
No, I think that's still being adhered to, as far as I'm aware. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. I don't believe we have any more questions, so thank you, Councillor Walsh, and thank you to all of the officers who have participated in that.
Thank you very much.
Okay. We move to agenda item number 8, which is the Adults and Health Scrutiny Committee meeting start time for the municipal year of 2022 to 2023. basically, is everyone happy with us starting at 7 o'clock? Is that agreed? Jolly good. Agenda item 9 is monitoring of scrutiny recommendations. The only issue, the only thing that we have here is where I was asked at the beginning of the year to write a letter regarding funding, and Charlotte and her officers came back and basically told us that they were already doing that and that they were speaking on a regular basis. So we have to bring this back to the committee so that we can close this as a recommendation, and we can review it later on in the year, but at this moment in time I would like to take it off of the agenda and have it as a closed item. Does everybody agree with that? Jolly good. And agenda item 10 is the forward plan of executive decisions. There was a forward plan published since the agenda was issued, and the latest version was published on the 4th of January and was sent to the committee on the Friday the 7th of January. This is the version that will be referred to, not the one in the agenda pack. Has everybody had a chance to see it? Does anybody have any questions on any of the items relating to health? If you'd like to read them out, that's...
Thank you, Chair. I've just identified items relevant to this committee just for ease. So page 3, workforce recruitment and retention grant funding. Page 15, PCC home care framework. Page 23, Health Watch service. Page 24, development of the integrated care system. Page 35, variation to the delegation agreement between Peterborough City Council and Cambridgeshire County Council regarding the delivery of the Healthy Child programme across Peterborough and Cambridgeshire. And page 39, allocation of workforce recruitment and retention funding in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So if you have any questions or queries on those, we can organise a briefing note if officers in attendance can't answer them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, agenda item 10, the work programme.
Thank you, Chair. So it's an opportunity just to review the work programme and the remaining meeting, which will be in March. So it's an opportunity to put forward any suggestions for additional items that can be discussed at the group reps meeting, which will be, I believe, next week. Or if you think of any before that, you can email myself and the Chair and we can discuss it at the meeting to see if there's an opportunity to pursue that item. Thank you.
That looks to be all quiet on the Western Front, so on that basis I will thank everybody for their attendance and for their participation. The questions have been really good, as they always are now. So thank you all for your participation. Thank you to Charlotte and Jyoti for staying here to the end. I declare the meeting closed. Thank you.